discussion, A Sea of Scandals, hosted by the Frontline Club. I'm Jonathan Leake, for 25 years the environment editor of the Sunday Times, now freelance, but also long before all that happened, a marine biologist. So nearly 40 years ago, I took a degree in oceanography and marine biology, which included a year on the Isle of Man. That's where I lived. When I was out there, I lived in what was then a small fishing village and a tourism, maybe a tourist centre, but a lot of fishing still going on, and also a marine biology centre for Liverpool University. And that's where I also learned to scuba dive. So I was struck then in that year in Port Erin and the Isle of Man by the closeness of the community we were living in and how the sea and the activities based around it brought people together. But I was also struck by the sight when scuba diving of seabeds that had been badly damaged and smashed up by fishing boats. So fishing meant incomes and community and prosperity for some, but at the cost of a lot of damage to wildlife, and damage that's pretty much invisible because it was hidden beneath the sea, where only people like me who were diving would really ever see it. So those conflicts between human needs and conservation have been around for decades, perhaps since the invention of steam-powered fishing boats. And conservationists and fishing communities and politicians have been arguing over how to solve them for almost as long. The latest attempt at that centres partly on marine protected areas, parts of the ocean where fishing is restricted. And we've heard some news today about how those sorts of areas can work, with the news that blue whale populations appear to be recovering in the Southern Ocean. There's more to it than just marine protected areas. It's also levels of fishing and not killing them and so on. But it gives a sense of what can be achieved. That marine protected areas are just a part of a much wider debate, which also takes in Brexit, also a subject which rouses passionate feelings. Back in 2015, George Eustice made the following pledge: if we act decisively and leave, we will regain control and have the power to deliver the change our fishing industry so craves. In 5 years' time, now, the only question we will ask ourselves is, why didn't we do it sooner? Well, it's 5 years later, and as with most things related to fisheries for the last few decades, the answer is still somewhere in the future. So here tonight, we've got three speakers we hope can point us towards at least the answers they would like. So we're going to be hearing from Elspeth Macdonald, Chief Executive of the Scottish Fishermen's Federation. She grew up in a coastal community in the Isle of Mull and also took a degree in marine fisheries science. And she's told Fishing News recently that she wants Scottish boats to get far more quota after Brexit. It's an interesting position because her industry employs about 5,000 people in Scotland. It's about 0.2% of the Scottish economy. But they rely also on exports to France. So there's another 5,000 people in Boulogne in France processing the landings from those Scottish boats. It gives you a sense of how intertwined they are and how many people rely on it. And then we're going to hear from Barrie Deas, who's Chief Executive of the National Federation of Fishermen's Organisations. He's called for caution in the introduction of marine protected areas and criticised Greenpeace for its recent stunt of dropping boulders across the Dogger Bank to deter trawling in a conservation area. And he's even questioned whether the Dogger Bank should even have that designation. But Barrie has in general been a very well-reasoned and well-informed representative of the fishing industry and has played a key part in much of the thinking going on in government. And finally, we'll hear from Charles Clover, whose book of some years ago now, but still equally valid, starts out by pointing out that sweeping a huge weighted net across the plains of Africa and catching lions, elephants and rhinos, while smashing up the ground and uprooting every plant and tree, would never be accepted on land. But despite this, an identical activity, trawling, he says, is carried out every single day of the year in the world's oceans. He's a powerful advocate for marine protected areas and wants more of them with stronger protection in each. So what we're guaranteed tonight is probably not a meeting of minds, but we may at least have a fascinating debate. Elspeth, I've seen you've just tuned in. Can you hear me okay? Hello, Elspeth.
Hi.
Oh, you've gone silent.
Oh, I'm muted again. Sorry. Yes, I can hear you perfectly. Thank you. I hope you can hear me.
I don't know if you heard the beginning of what I was saying, but I actually put you first on the list of speakers. Are you happy to jump straight in?
I am. I just have some quite short introductory comments to make.
I was going to ask, actually, if you could start, just for the sake of the audience who may not all be familiar with who's who, if you could just set out who you represent and a few key facts about your industry so that we can kind of get a bedrock for what's to follow. And also, it'd be quite interesting to make the point of how you differ, how the Scottish fishing industry differs from the English one.
Yeah, sure. I can cover all of that. Thank you. I can cover all of that. So I'm Elspeth Macdonald. I'm the Chief Executive of the Scottish Fishermen's Federation, and I have been in this role for something in the region of about 18 months now. So I've certainly joined this industry and this job at a very interesting and fast-moving time. The Scottish Fishermen's Federation is a democratically constituted industry group. It was set up in 1973, and its key aims are to protect and promote the collective interests of our constituent associations, to ensure that there is a viable and sustainable future for the fleet, both in terms of economics and environmental responsibility, and that we work to improve the perception of the fishing industry, attracting new entrants and ensuring professional standards of training and safety in the industry. And I would absolutely emphasize safety there. This can be a hazardous industry. So there are 8 constituent associations within the Federation, and that represents around, I think it's about 450 vessels within that membership. And that represents a very wide range of fishing businesses, both inshore and offshore, and catching a very wide range of fish and shellfish species. So thinking a bit more broadly about the Scottish industry, the most recent statistics, the Scottish Sea Fisheries statistics were published for 2019. They're done on an annual basis. And for Scotland as a whole, in 2019, we had just over 2,000 fishing vessels, 2,098, I believe, and about 75% of those were smaller vessels in the under 10 metre category, and about 25% are larger vessels over 10 metres. We have just under 5,000 active fishers in Scotland, mostly men, but not wholly. We have some female fishers. And so that number of about 5,000 represents people who are regularly employed or engaged in commercial fishing. In terms of the contribution that the Scottish part of the industry makes to the UK as a whole, I guess Scotland punches a bit above its weight in population terms when you look at fishing. The total tonnage of fish landed by Scottish vessels, and also the value of the catch landed by Scottish vessels, both of these account for about 60% of the UK totals. So we are a big part of the UK industry. And our industry essentially fishes across the whole range of different stocks, shellfish stocks, whitefish, demersal fish, so the fish that live close to the bottom, the whitefish like cod and haddock, and also pelagic fish, so the mid-water migratory species such as mackerel and herring. And in terms of the most important parts of the Scottish industry, in terms of value, the most valuable species would be mackerel. That makes up just over a quarter of the total value of the Scottish catch. The second most important species and the most important shellfish species would be nephrops, the prawns. And then in whitefish, if you take haddock, cod and monkfish together, they account for about 20% of the total value of fish landed by the Scottish vessels. So in Scotland last year, the value at first landing of our catch was just under 0.6 billion. And as I say, Scottish vessels account for around 60% of both value and landings of all fish caught by UK vessels. And I would say at the start, the fishing industry needs to have sustainable fisheries. The people who are in this industry are in it for the long term. This is not an industry of ephemeral businesses. And I think one of the things that struck me most when I came into this job was just the extent to which many of the businesses involved in fishing in Scotland have been involved in fishing for generations. As I say, they're not in it for the short term, and they want to pass these businesses on to future generations in good heart. And for those businesses to remain sustainable, they need to have sustainable fisheries. And I think our industry has a good track record in working with governments and with other stakeholders to enhance and improve sustainability and to improve the way that we are able to catch fish and make sure that we've got sustainable industry for the future. So, for example, we have invested significant effort into trialling and testing different types of fishing gears to improve selectivity, and Scotland has been very proactive in, for example, prohibiting the use of certain types of gear and certain types of configurations of net and twine that can be used legally elsewhere in Europe, but which we don't allow to be used in Scotland. We just recently published an updated environmental policy statement, which is available on our website and contains a great deal more detailed information about a number of the initiatives that we are involved with. And this would include, for example, with funding that we have been fortunate to have from the Scottish Government and the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund. For over 10 years now, we have been running an independent fishery onboard observer scheme, and this has allowed industry data to contribute to scientific stock assessment and to the stock assessment that are undertaken by the International Councils of the Exploration of the Seas, and has also supported industry-led schemes to improve fishing gear selectivity. So just touching for a moment on fisheries science, I would just say fisheries science is not an exact science, and fisheries scientists wouldn't dispute that. Fisheries science contains a great many uncertainties and assumptions, and many of those assumptions are made rightly on a precautionary basis. And it's easy to assume that the numbers are accurate, but really they're not, and there are high degrees of uncertainty. And I think then it's important that we sometimes step away from the detailed numbers and the fluctuations that we see in scientific advice year to year and focus actually on the trends.
Elspeth, can I just jump in there for one quick? So given we've got just an hour, what I'd like to do now is to move you onto the very specific topics fitting into that excellent framework you set out of marine protected areas, the Fisheries Bill and Brexit. In other words, we've got a push by conservationists for marine protected areas. What are they? What should they be trying to do? And how might your members respond to them? And then putting that into the wider context of Brexit and British attempts to protect and safeguard its own waters.
Yep, sure. Well, we work very closely with the Scottish Government and other stakeholders on marine protected areas. There's a pretty extensive network of protections that are in place. There are a number of pieces of legislation that require protection of species habitats or priority marine features. And we have worked very closely with the Scottish Government to, in terms of the designation of those areas and the management measures around them. And I think what we have been very keen to promote and ensure is that the designation and the management measures of MPAs are based on evidence. And for example, I think there can be a perception perhaps in the public's mind that a marine protected area is an area where no fishing or other types of commercial activity can take place, and that is very much not the case. It is about ensuring that the management measures that are in place for a particular protected area are appropriate for whatever that area is set up to protect. but that there can be an appropriate balance between conservation and commercial activity that could take place there. I think the linkage with the Fisheries Bill is really important. The Fisheries Bill is the new piece of legislation on the statute book in the UK. If it hasn't yet received royal assent, it will be very close to that point. And that, I think sustainability is at the heart of that fish bill. There are, I think, 8 or 9 fisheries objectives set out on the face of the bill. And I think it is either 5 or 6 of these relate very specifically to sustainability. So I think the Fisheries Bill provides us now with the right legislative framework for the future for us to have the right arrangements in place for the UK. So all of that links obviously inextricably to Brexit, because it is the UK's exit from the EU, and therefore our exit from the common fisheries policy, that requires us to have a new set of legislation in the UK for how we manage our fisheries. And I think it is very apparent through the bill and the work that has gone forward to develop that bill, is that this needs to be a collaborative process involving government, involving industry, involving other stakeholders. And I think as we go forward developing the fisheries management plans that will flow from that bill, there's going to be a lot of work to do to make sure that we've got a real sort of co-management and co-production of what those fisheries management plans look like.
Many thanks, Elspeth. Sorry, I muted myself temporarily there. One quick question with an answer that could be as long as you want, but I beg you to keep it short, which is, you use the word sustainable a great deal there. And sustainable is one of those magic words that means lots of different things to different people. Some years ago, I can remember asking DEFRA what their definition was after they published a paper, mentioning it many times, and they didn't actually know what it meant. They had no definition. And hopefully things have moved on since then. But I note that the sustainability clause in the Fisheries Bill was actually, as a primary objective, removed and then put back in. So there's controversy over it still. But what do you mean, from a fisherman's organisation's perspective, by sustainability? What does it actually mean in practical terms?
Well, I think looking at it in the context of the Fisheries Bill, I think what's important is that when we talk about sustainability, we're balancing all 3 pillars of sustainability. So we have environmental sustainability, we have social sustainability, and we have economic sustainability. And it's about, I think, through the bill, making sure that these things are applied in balance. And if I'm just looking here at the document I mentioned, our environmental policy statement, which I would recommend to anybody who wants to read a bit more about this. We say at its simplest form, sustainability can be defined as meeting the needs of the present without compromising and perhaps improving the ability of future generations to meet theirs. And I think that's exactly what we're trying to achieve here, ensuring that we can have environmental sustainability with a sustainable industry, sustainable communities benefiting from both of those things, not just now, but also into the future. Okay,
many thanks for that, Elspeth. Barrie, I'm not quite sure where you came in. Did you hear the running order? Because you're next, if you don't mind. So being.
Well, I'm here.
Good to see you again, by the way, and thanks for joining us. Well, if perhaps you could follow the same structure and just very briefly set out who you are and what your organisation is and who you represent, just because a lot of people don't quite realise the distinctions, possibly even between Scottish and English, and certainly between who your members are and the fact that I think some of your members are foreign owners of British quota and so on. So if you could very briefly set that out, I'd be very grateful. And then we can address the issue of marine protected areas and their future role. I've seen your criticisms of some of them, and I'm interested in hearing about that.
Okay, yeah, I'm the chief executive of the NFFO, and we represent fishermen and fishing vessel operators in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So in the UK generally, there's about 5,500 vessels, of which 3,500 are England and Wales. About 7,000 fishermen we're talking about there. It's an extremely diverse fleet. So we represent very large pelagic freezer trawlers, that's fishing for large shoals of mackerel, blue whiting, horse mackerel, right down to single-handed vessels fishing off beaches and out of creeks. So we represent everybody. And fishing for quota species, but also non-quota species. As some of the participants in this webinar will be aware, there's a certain amount of UK licenses and quota over the last 20 years while we've been in the single market have been purchased by Anglo-Spanish, Anglo-Dutch, Anglo-Icelandic companies and individuals. They are part of the scene. They tend to be concentrated on particular species. So that's really who we represent. In terms of the themes tonight of marine protected areas, Brexit and the Fisheries Bill, and the title, Sea of Scandals, obviously designed to by a journalist to generate interest, and I'm sure it's been very successful. But you know, that is very much part and parcel of this catastrophe narrative that is often attached to fishing and fish stocks. Yet, and Elspeth touched on this, all the scientific evidence, so this is not just me speaking, this is the authoritative international peer-reviewed scientists in International Council for Exploration of the Seas. All the evidence suggests that actually the trends are quite contrary to us going in a downward spiral to extinction. The reality is that fishing pressure has been halved since around about the year 2000. I'll concede that the 1990s were a basket case. We got everything wrong. Common fisheries policy was complicit in increasing fishing capacity, providing grants and loans. There was an expansion of the fleet. There was rank overfishing. Nobody could be profitable on the quotas. There was over quota landings, illegality. The science went into a tailspin. But after the fleet was right-sized through largely through decommissioning, what we've seen, because fishing pressure has been reduced, we've seen the biomass of the main commercial stocks increasing steadily. And yes, there are a few outliers, North Sea cod, for example, but there are particular reasons for that. The distribution of cod is moving northwards by about 12 kilometers per year. And that is pretty much the explanation for what's happening with cod. But the big picture is actually of fisheries right across the Northeast Atlantic. So let's focus down. You know, we've got the global picture with those big catastrophic numbers, but if we focus down on what is actually happening in our fisheries, they're not doing too badly. We could do better, certainly. But what we have is steadily increasing fish stocks towards maximum sustainable yield. Something like 75–80% of stocks are already fished at maximum sustainable yield. Even discards, which was the bête noire of the fishing industry, and ultimately ended in the EU landings obligation. Even before that, the EU landings obligation was introduced, the trends and discards have been falling very dramatically by over 90% in the North Sea groundfish fishery. And I'd be very happy to talk about other major initiatives, particularly the Catch Cleaner UK initiative, which is all about finding ways through collaboration between scientists, fishers and fisheries managers how to reduce unwanted in-catch. So nobody is suggesting that we are all the way there yet, but the notion that we are going in the wrong direction is very prevalent in the media, and as I say, is contrary to the evidence. I was very struck by, in your film, where the Ullapool children, I think it was Maya, said, we have to think about these issues logically, and I completely agree with that. And one of the features of a logical approach is to pay attention to the evidence and just not make things up. And so that's one of the reasons why we very much welcome in the Fisheries Bill that policy should be evidence-based. So I think it's also, I'd like to just put out there that there are essentially, in broad terms, there are two ways we can approach fisheries management. This is perhaps my experience over a long time, but we can either do it through legislation, a kind of top-down prescriptive legislation, necessarily pretty blanket measures, one-size-fits-all kind of approach. And then we just rely on the policemen, the enforcement authorities to enforce those rules. Now, the experience of the Common Fisheries Policy is that kind of approach doesn't really work. It doesn't deliver. There are unintended consequences, not surprisingly, because the measures aren't designed by people who are involved in the fisheries. Once they're in place, they're very difficult to adjust. The alternative to that kind of top-down blanket approach is a kind of co-management approach, where the key people in the room are the people who fish, the fisheries scientists who can help provide good management information on which to base decisions, and the fisheries managers. Very much focused on evidence. If you don't have good information, you will not make good management decisions. So it's all about getting good information. And our understanding of the Fisheries Bill is that we have, for the first time, outside of the Common Fisheries Policy, a framework there that will allow us to design and implement species-specific management plans in an agile and flexible way. And when we get it wrong, and we will get it wrong, because fisheries management is really complicated, when we get it wrong, we can change direction and change our policies. So I think turning, I think, to what maybe you want to talk about, marine protected areas. I mean, I think the fishing industry understands and acknowledges that marine protected areas have an important role to play to protect vulnerable ecosystems, to habitats and species. But they are not a panacea, and they're often presented by NGOs in campaign mode as exactly that, a panacea. They're not very effective at protecting highly mobile species. But nevertheless, we understand that there is a need for marine protected areas. We thought, certainly in England, we thought we had an understood process for introducing marine protected areas, where they were designated, and then there would be evidence put forward on which appropriate management measures would be based. And we're into that process. We're into the process of designating and designing effective management measures for MPAs. That takes a little bit of time, and I can understand why people may be impatient. But all of this takes place against the background of the big change that I mentioned earlier, an enormous reduction in fishing pressure, an enormous reduction in fishing mortality, the technical term, and the stocks coming back up. So, the big picture is, yes, there's more to be done, but this catastrophe narrative and the campaign the campaigns that are based on that kind of thinking really don't help. What we need is a proper dialogue between that is based on evidence, not hearsay, and that can provide us with a way forward. I'll just leave it at that, I think.
Many thanks, Barrie. Yeah, thanks for that. I've just got one quick question for you, which is prompted partly by seeing some of Callum Roberts' research. He's the Professor of Marine Biology at York. And I guess he makes the point that the sense of whether fish stocks are returning and doing better and so on is partly based on the baseline you choose. So I've looked at the State of Nature report for this year, and basically you're 100% right that many demersal species are coming back in quite strongly compared to the 1990s. If you were to look back at the seas as they were in, say, the 19th or 18th century, Robert's point is that something like 90% of the life has gone from the seas around Britain. And so the small changes we're seeing now are relatively tiny fluctuations compared to what should be there. So I wonder how you'd respond to that point about the baseline you choose really being the determinant of what kind of judgments you make.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest change in human society is the introduction of farming, the Neolithic revolution, and we have been having as a species, been having an enormous impact on the planet ever since. Fishing is not exempt from that. Every fishing method has an environmental footprint. That footprint needs to be managed, completely accept that. But on the other side of the equation, we're providing food, and fishing actually has one of the lowest carbon footprint forms of food production. It is a form of food production that has the lowest carbon footprint. One of arguably the most significant environmental metric for our planet. So I think what I would say is, yeah, you can look at these things in a kind of one-dimensional approach. But what I think we have to do is look at it in the round. Elspeth was quite right. Sustainability is about the environment, but it's also about social and economic dimensions. And part of that is about the food systems and that we choose. So yeah, you can switch the tap off and let's not have any more fishing. But then the alternative then would be to use food production systems that based on terrestrial production that have a greater ecological consequence there. It's all about balance. It's all about getting the balance right, and that's why a kind of one-dimensional focus, campaigning focus on one species or one management measure. For example, putting forward marine protected areas as the primary way to manage highly mobile fish stocks. Well, that's nonsense. There are better tools to do that.
Barrie, I'm just going to stop you there just because of time, not because I'm not interested. And just to do a little bit of housekeeping, as it were, there is a facility to ask questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens. If people want to put questions, we'll be coming to those after our final speaker, Charles Clover, has had his say. Charles, are you ready to roll? And can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure at what point I meant to dispute what previously.
You mean you have too many to dispute, or that you?
Well, no. We are Blue Marine Foundation. We're a charity that works with fishermen and has marine reserves, which fishermen are very pleased to fish in, and where they catch more than they would have done before because they're protected. So I think there's a lot of nonsense being talked. But there is a particular piece of nonsense which I read on a briefing to the House of Lords, and I've now heard Elspeth say, which is that you've got to balance the 3 pillars of sustainability. That is utter right, or utter tripe. You depend upon, and this is what the Sustainable Development Goals say. So this is, DEFRA's got that wrong if they've been saying this. The biosphere is what we base everything on. We cannot have society living in places on the shore unless we have the biosphere. If we've screwed it up, then there is going to be no society and no economy. Society is based on the biosphere and the economy on that. It's called the Sustainable Development Goals wedding cake. That is the current definition of sustainability. The one sits on the other, sits on the other. So you can't balance them out. You can apportion them. Once you've decided how much of the biosphere you can take and how much you need to leave in the sea, you can apportion them between society and then decide how you're going to build the most effective economy on it. But you can't balance those goals. And DEFRA has got it wrong. They've been told they've got it wrong. And it's not the current SDG thinking. So I just needed to say that because that's quite an important intellectual point. I was going to say that, well, actually, Jonathan, you stole half the things I was going to say anyway, so I won't go back. There are astonishing, we need to make quite clear that Brexit is a turning point. Could be, is going to be a turning point, whether it's up or down. But it more than most of the other things, from a completely objective and whichever way you voted point of view, we have an opportunity to get it right, which for at least 40 years, and you could argue for centuries, we haven't been. It is shown that if, seabeds and seas and species who pass over them are given a chance to recover, marine life floods back faster than we could have dared hope. There are examples of that. Very few of them around the world, but where we have marine reserves, they exist. And where we have good fisheries management. I tend to agree with Barrie on that quite regularly. But we have a situation where we don't have the herring anymore. We don't have the bluefin tuna, or at least very few of them in the North Sea. We are at a reduced level. We don't have massive spur dog, tope, smooth hound, long fin, blue fin, poor beagle, thresher, mako, great white sharks, which Oliver Goldsmith saw in the 18th century. We catch a sixth of the amount that fishing vessels with all their technological gear catch, a sixth of the amount that sailing boats caught in the 1880s. There are fewer fish. So let's not kid ourselves. But the point is, we could bring them back if we tried hard enough, we did this properly. The problem about modern fisheries science and the problem about modern fisheries people is they're trying to look at what happened in the 90s when they're not being ambitious enough, in my view. And I don't think that's acceptable anymore, because in the course of the Fisheries Bill, we have discovered, we've been told for the first time by the government that the right to fish is a public right, and that the fisheries are owned by the Crown on behalf of all of us. Well, if they're owned by all of us, then why is 55% of English quota owned by foreigners, and why is pretty much 95% of it owned by industrial fleets, which are arguably more damaging and destructive to the ecosystem than the inshore and slightly offshore fleets? Why is that? I don't think that's a sustainable position. So the Brexit has within it these great dynamos of change, which will happen willy-nilly if you accept that it is the public right and this is a public asset, because public assets are better managed in other circumstances, whether it's the Crown Estate or the roads. What the public wants gets taken account of rather more. In terms of what people have said about fisheries management, I would point out that we're coming out of the Common Fisheries Policy, which was supposed to have all stocks back to sustainable levels by 2020. It has signally failed to do that. I think 46% of stocks are currently overfished in the year that we were meant to stop overfishing by. Well, we're out of the Common Fisheries Policy, but the Common Fisheries Policy is failing because Europe's politicians fail to observe their own laws. How is it going to be after Brexit in the Fisheries Bill? Will they be ambitious enough? I mean, Elspeth's absolutely right. It's all down to fisheries management plans. And it is very important that we consult everybody and that these are co-management and that we don't do top-down. But we are totally aware of that because we work with fishermen in Lyme Bay, a marine protected area. But the killer point on fisheries management, if I may just finish that off before we get on to marine protected areas, is this. Rainer Froese, a very distinguished German scientist, looked at 400 European fish stocks, and he was amazed to discover that, you know, we catch 8.8 million tons of fish a year in the whole of Europe. But when he did the numbers, what surprised him was that we could catch an additional 5 million tons if we only managed them properly. Now, obviously it's worse as you go further south, but that is also true in the North Atlantic. We would get that plenty back. We might even get back to Oliver Goldsmith if we set quotas slightly lower for a couple of years and then obeyed European law, which says MSY, maximum sustained yield, no more. And we would have that bounty back roughly in 5 to 10 years. So why do we do it? Profits for fishermen would double in that time span. So, you know, the industry is always trying to look at tomorrow. If we were to look at 15 years hence and decide how to get a better result, maybe we should even devise a blue bond to make that an investable proposition. Maybe that's what the other speakers want to do too. I don't know. I'd like to hear. So we better get on to
Charles, I'm just going to jump in there and say, if you can, we want to get some questions in. So if you can finish off in 2 or 3 minutes, I'll be grateful.
Sure, yeah. I'm just taking on the points. So if the sea is going to be managed as a public asset, then we should be aiming for healthy seas, not picking amid the ruins, in my view. Healthy seas are in our interest, but particularly in the interest of fishing communities. We've just had this very good report, which shows that if we increase the number of protected areas, we would have, by 5% in the world, we'd have 20% more fish to catch, which seems quite important. So I'm really positive about this, and I'm really positive for the fishing industry. But you know, we need to. The only way you invest in the sea is by taking less out of it, and it grows, and you can then catch more. So we need to have a system for doing that. But we have made a lot of mistakes in managing fish, so that's why you need marine protected areas. Marine protected areas work. Look at Lyme Bay. This is a protected area of a sort. It's a European protected area. It's quite a large one. It's the largest in the UK, or was at one time, where trawls and dredges are banned. And there is an explosion of life. 42 fishermen fish there with pots and set nets, according to a voluntary code. One fisherman recently described it in an interview as a gold mine. We are putting out a film about Lyme Bay and the win-win project between conservationists and fishermen that we have run there with them, co-managed for the last 10 years on Tuesday next week. So I just want to skip to this fact that, you know, at a national level, Britain's doing wonderfully well, championing the ambition of protecting 30% of the world's oceans by 2030. It seems certain people on this call don't seem to know that. That is our national target. But you know, you have to accept that, you know, while we do Kristin da Cunha, which we helped fundraise for, many other people did, and Ascension, these huge fully protected reserves out there in the Atlantic, you know, we need to make protection, mean protection, nearer to home. Because out there, because of the common fisheries policy and the confusion and the fact that fishing trumps environmental law in European waters, we have not been applying any management to our offshore marine reserves, and that's not good enough. And places like the Dogger Bank, designation about 2012, talked about for a lot longer than that, probably actually in law should have been protected for earlier than that. No management whatsoever. An entirely nuclear arsenal of every single fishing method has been applied to them, including pulse trawling, which was even the European Commission now accepts illegal. There are more fishing vessels in marine protected areas than outside them. That is a report published last year. This is ludicrous.
Charles, that's a great place to end, if you don't mind. Not again because we're not interested. We are, but we're just short on time. I think it's possible for anyone listening to put their hands up, and I can see them on my screen, and allow them to ask a question. But just while people are figuring out that technology, Charles, I'll just put one quick question to you. And this is, hopefully, this is a massive question, which I'm sure you can answer very fast, which is, what should Britain do about the quota that is now held, the UK quota now held by foreign boats and foreign skippers? Is there something simple and easy we should do, maybe in the long term, to bring that back, or should we simply keep that as the status quo?
I think the historic misallocation was really between the offshore and the inshore fleet. I think that's the real problem. I don't want to say that, you know, foreigners can't own British companies, but I do think that they've got to show that they are returning some investment into the UK Treasury. There are lots of fishing vessels, and some of them are on the Dogger Bank, because I've been having a look, which return nothing, no benefit whatsoever to the UK Treasury for fishing in British waters. They don't pay any licenses, they don't pay any taxes, they land on the continent. Now that must stop, because that's not doing UK Limited any good.
Thank you, Charles. We're going to go to Jacqueline Gibson, who's put her hand up. Jacqueline, can you unmute? I'm not sure you can actually speak yet.
Yes.
Yes. Now, before you speak, just a quick warning. Given the time, we'd really appreciate everyone who's asking a question to do so quickly rather than to make long statements. So,
okay.
In the hope you can manage that, please go ahead.
Yes, well, hopefully you can bear with me regarding fishing in Irish waters, that Norwegian fishing vessels are coming in, kind of hoovering up, if you like, small
Sorry,
fry.
Jackie, I'm just going to stop you. Just could you briefly introduce yourself, just who you are and what
yes.
if you want any particular panelists to respond, please do address your question to them.
So Jacqueline Gibson, I'm a sustainability consultant, and I used to work with the Locks Agency in Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland, a cross-border EU-funded kind of project to help protect fisheries both sides of the border. Come from a conservation background. And what else? Yes, an advocate
that's fine. We get it.
Transparency of food and things. So as I mentioned there, Norwegian fishing boats coming in. I grew up in the largest fishing village in Northern Ireland called Kilkeel. So boats are coming into the Republic of Ireland waters, fishing large quantities of small fish. As I mentioned, these are Norwegian-owned fishing boats. This doesn't happen. It's not allowed to happen in Norway. Nets are too big, so the small fish get away and rejuvenate, and they're not allowed to fish for fish meal. And that is the issue. They're hoovering this up to go straight to plants that are making fish meal for salmon farms, which are 50% owned by Norwegian, or 51% owned by Norwegian, 49% owned by Simon Coveney's brother. So coming into Ireland with, you know, low corporation tax, buying up business, influencing government to pass laws. So my question is, why is this being allowed to happen in the Irish waters? Should such licenses be repatriated to local shores and fishermen? And how could or why is salmon being certified as sustainable by withholding the story behind the food supply chain?
Okay, those are great questions. I suspect the answer might lie in there having been once a trade-off which allowed British boats into perhaps Norwegian waters, but I'm just guessing there. Elspeth, does that sound like something that you're familiar with? Because I suspect it possibly is.
Well, I don't have much involvement with fisheries in Ireland. I represent industry in Scotland.
No, I was thinking of the trade-off though.
What I'm thinking is actually, I think what the situation that Jacqueline's described is something that will be permitted under the Common Fisheries Policy, whereby the EU has annual negotiations with Norway about the exchange of access to each other's waters and access to fishing opportunities. And it may be that the situation that Jacqueline's described, and I'm not familiar with the detail of it, but that may simply be a manifestation of those negotiations that happened between the EU and Norway. And because the UK is leaving the Common Fisheries Policy, that's exactly the sort of situation that we want to be able to determine for ourselves in future. We want to be able to negotiate separately with the EU. We want to be able to negotiate separately with Norway in terms of who can come into our waters, what they can catch, and what the rules are. So I think what Jacqueline's expressing there is some frustration that certainly some people in Ireland, probably parts of the possibly parts of the industry, possibly society, feels that these vessels are not fishing in ways that that Irish people would like them to be. And there's a limit to how much that can be changed because of the rules of the CFP. So I think it's a really good example, actually, of why the CFP should allow the UK to determine who can come in, who can catch what in our waters, and what the rules will be.
Yeah, so it could be a cure in Brexit. Charles, what Jacqueline has described is fishing at the bottom of the food chain, isn't it? How serious an impact might that kind of fishing have?
I'm not wonderfully clear what the stock is or how that is happening. I'm afraid I just don't know enough about what the Norwegians are up to in that context. And as with your other two speakers, I like to base everything I say on science and knowledge of the stock. So I can't help with that. But fishing at the base of the food chain is problematic in a mixed fishery. It was problematic in the Norwegian cod fishery in the Barents Sea that apparently precipitated a crash of the cod stock when the capelin got hammered. It's generally not a good idea to fish a forage fish if you want to have a valuable finfish fishery. That's what Daniel Pauly's always said.
Good. Okay, Charles, I'm just going to move on swiftly now. Barrie, if you don't mind, I'll jump over you, as I think Elspeth covered that quite well. But I wonder if we can move to Ruth Greenway. Ruth, can you hear me? And can you unmute? Ruth, are you there?
Hello there. I'm sitting with Ruth.
No, listed as a Ruth.
Yeah. No, my partner's registered for us, but we've been listening along and enjoying it a great deal. It's quite insightful. But I know we're short of time, so I'll get straight to the point. Looking at how you've got ghost nets and all the detritus that's left by fishermen on the seabed, which will basically be death traps for, well, 600 years or more. Wouldn't it be a sensible move to make plastic or a man-made fishing nets illegal at this stage, make them or compel them to be made out of natural fibers, which will decompose. And that way you'll have an end to the factory fish ships, because you won't have the 4-mile long fishing lines, and you'll have a flourishing of small boats because people will still want the fish. So that will be a much more sustainable way, because you'll have a much higher layer of employment, and you'll have much safer seas once you've got rid of all that horrible plastic.
Barrie, that sounds like something your members would care a great deal about. I wonder what you think of that idea.
No, I think the heightened sensitivities to plastics in the marine environment, I think, have led to reevaluation of fishing gears. What could be, how could gears be redesigned in order to reduce plastic waste? And I think that there are a number of initiatives underway under that heading. Also, we run, and I think the Scottish industry also run, fishing for litter. So when fishermen in their nets catch litter, plastic bags, etc., they're encouraged to take them ashore, and there's facilities on shore to receive and dispose of those, recycle those. So there are not only, in that sense, not only are fishermen taking home their nets that they no longer have use for, but they're also taking home other people's plastic waste from the marine environment. So, you know, there's a number of strands there. I think, you know, the point about small boats and big boats, my view is that you need both small boats and big boats. The very large shoaling species like mackerel and herring and blue whiting, and incidentally, I think that probably the previous question was in relation to blue whiting, which is caught in Irish waters. You need large, efficient vessels to fish for those efficiently and safely. You know, you're talking about very large shoals far offshore. It makes sense to harvest those with large vessels, but the quid pro quo for that is you can't have too many large vessels. So, you know, in the UK fleet, vessels of that description, I think the licenses are limited to 25. You're only talking about 20, 25. You're talking about, when you're talking about small vessels, you're talking about 3,500 in England. So I think it's horses for courses. You need big, big vessels, middle-sized vessels, and small vessels. It depends on the fishery. It depends how many vessels you're talking about. Depends on the resource. This is why within the Fisheries Bill, this idea of fisheries management plans at the right spatial level, at the right targeting the right. Now, a fishery might be a species widely dispersed, or it might be a group of species. It really rather depends on the circumstances, and I think you know, part of the answer to these questions, it very much depends on the specific fisheries.
Barrie, very quickly, let me just drag you back to one of the key points in that question, which was the fact that fishing gives you a short-term gain, a net full of fish, but it leaves a very long-lasting legacy of plastic all over the ocean. And although some fishermen may remove what they find, there's still a great deal of plastic in the ocean. His point was essentially that that can't we make nets out of something a little more, which will decompose naturally? And why do we have to keep using so much plastic? Elspeth, do you want to come in on that one? I see you waving your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point. I can't remember the statistics off the top of my head, but I think the majority of plastic that's actually in the ocean is from terrestrial sources. But obviously there is waste from users of the sea too. But I just wanted to make the point about vessel gear and trying to find better ways of doing things. And I think that's a really good point. And for example, in our pelagic fleet, which are the larger boats, the ones Barrie was describing that go and catch the large shoals of fish, they are becoming increasingly good and focused on recycling their gear. So when their nets have reached the end of their useful life, they go for recycling. And in fact, just one of my colleagues today was sending me a picture from one of the ports in northeast of Scotland showing nets being loaded onto a lorry to go away for recycling. So I think you know, the industry does recognise that we don't want to be leaving things behind. We don't want to be polluters of the sea, and there are moves afoot to try and increase the amount of material that can be recycled, to make sure that as much material is being brought back to shore. And I think this is a work in progress. There's more to do, absolutely, but I think it's really encouraging to see the focus now that parts of the fleet are already putting onto recycling their gear. Thanks,
Elspeth. Charles, in David Attenborough's documentaries, plastic in the form of nets, but also terrestrial plastic, was one of the most emotive sights, and it encouraged a huge response from the public. What's your perception of the scale of that problem? Is it as bad? Is it the key issue that we're facing, or a key issue, or has it been pushed to the forefront by emotive pictures and video?
I'm told that a ghost gear kills 4 times more marine life than other macro plastic. So it's significant. I think that we're all horrified by the amount of plastic ending up in the oceans, and I do think fishermen can play their part, do frequently play their part, have conscience about it. But what we should do in terms of re-engineering it is beyond my competence.
Okay, thanks, Charles. Now, we're running out of time very rapidly. I've got one question has come up on the written questions, which is quite interesting in the context of Britain and what's happening in Britain's oceans in terms of our move towards renewable energy. And the question is from Pete Murray, who says, does the burgeoning number of wind farms around the coast provide de facto protected areas? That's kind of a practical question. I wonder if, Barrie, if you feel able to address that one.
What wind farms do and marine protected areas, depending on the management measures that apply, is cause displacement effects. That can be problematic because there is increasing competition for space at sea. Fishing opportunities tend to be concentrated in particular places. The ocean isn't the same all over in terms of abundance of fish. It would maybe be nice if they were. So I think the answer to this question is, can wind farms, of which there is a huge expansion and projected more expansion, can they provide reserves? Well, at the moment, technically, vessels, particularly using static gear, can fish in many of those areas. Trawlers find it difficult because of the kind of maneuverability. So de facto, these are very large spaces that are denied access to the more mobile kinds of fishing. But I think this has to all be understood within the context of marine spatial planning, and where can fishing doesn't have a monopoly of the seabed or the sea. We understand that. We have to find ways of coexisting with marine renewables, with the many cables that come across the ocean. So really, the question is about marine spatial planning, about coexistence, about dialogue, and maybe there are overlaps where our interests coincide, but that does take a lot of talking.
Okay, thanks for that, Barrie. Now, we're rapidly running out of time, and we've got 2 more things to do. The first one is, I'd just like to go around the 3 of you and ask what your hopes or vision might be for Britain's seas and the progress happening in them, say, 10 years hence. We'll be post-Brexit, we'll be post-Fisheries Bill, there'll be an entirely new regime in Britain's oceans, also including renewable energy. So, in brief, I wonder if each of you could set out what you hope we'd be seeing from that, adding in, of course, the impacts or benefits for our coastal communities. After we've done that, we're going to switch to a video sent in to us by the Ullapool Sea Savers, who are a group of youngsters in Ullapool, Scotland, who featured in Prince William's A Planet for Us All, looking at their work in protecting their local marine environment. And that will be our closing video. So which of you would like to go first in just setting us a little bit of a vision? Elspeth, how do you feel?
Yeah, I'm happy to, because I think it touches on a lot of the things that we've been talking about tonight. I think it would be great 10 years hence to find that we had we'd lived through a period whereby the work that we've been able to do under the new Fisheries Bill, Fisheries Act, gives us exactly those sorts of fisheries management plans that we need: adaptive, innovative, responsive ways of managing fisheries, so that we have healthy stocks, good fisheries, sustainable management, that we have, I think, got finding the right way forward in terms of that sort of spatial planning, some of those pressures on space in the sea for different activities that we've spoken about, that we have, I hope, a greater recognition of the real importance that the industry can make to the production of a low carbon food source, and recognition of the important contribution that we can make to reducing carbon footprint of our diet more generally. But I would love to see also that we could have reduced even further the carbon footprint of the fleet through innovative technology, for example, that can drive that carbon footprint down even lower. So I think some of these things would be great to see 10 years from now.
Okay, Barrie, your 10-year vision.
The first thing I wanted to say is, in doing a little background reading for today, I found out that the carbon footprint for whitefish and pelagic fisheries is lower than tofu, which was I thought quite illuminating, quite interesting. But in terms of vision for 10 years, well, the negotiations that are currently underway ought to deliver a much fairer quota balance for the UK. And on the back of that, I think there's a lot that we can do for our coastal communities. The Fisheries Bill has given us a much more agile fisheries policy, but it's only a framework, it's only a platform. There's a huge amount of work to be done. I would hope that in 10 years we've got a good tranche of fisheries plans in place, up and running, delivered through co-management that address those kind of very basic questions. Where are we now? We need the information, the good sound information on which to manage our fisheries, and reduce the kind of statistical avalanches that we've kind of heard tonight, where well, where does that figure come from? Is it valid? Who made it? What interest? An agreed understanding of the information on which we're managing our fisheries. The next question is, where do we want to be? I'm not really that interested in interminable discussions about maximum sustainable yield or economic yield. I'm more interested in moving in the right direction. If you continue to move in the right direction, that's much more important than arcane discussions about destination. And then the really key issue is, how do we get there? What are the measures that will take us to where we need to go, fishery by fishery? And I think the answer for that lies in the dialogue, in the co-management, in the discussions between fishers who are actually involved in those fisheries, the fisheries scientists that help us understand what's going on, the trends, and the fisheries managers, the fisheries administrators. So, I think that's that would be my hope.
Many thanks, Barrie. Charles, so in 10 years' time, will we have more fish in our waters, and might we have less Europeans? What do you think?
I hope we have some ambitious fisheries management plans by then, and they're actually working. But nice to see that, like everybody else. I do think we'll need to reallocate quota, quite a lot of it, because the wrong people got it the first time. and it's very unfair. But I don't think we should just always talk about the sea and fishing, because the sea is the ocean is the greatest carbon sink on the planet. And we haven't yet begun to run down exactly what the impact of the fishing industry actually is. But I would very much suspect that it is not as light or heavier than lighter than tofu, when you actually reckon in the impact that trawling and dredging has on the seabed, which has a capacity like rainforests to soak up carbon. If you mow a rainforest, it doesn't soak up carbon. The same is true of the seabed. We haven't got the numbers on that yet, but I think when we do, we'll find that we do need to set aside large chunks of the sea or change our fishing techniques because of the impact on climate change that the fishing industry is having, but that we haven't measured yet.
That's a fascinating point. It's something that could deserve an entire separate evening. In the meantime, we are sadly curtailed for time, and what I'd like to do is very quickly switch over to Luke Douglas-Hume, whose organisation Clear Public Space organised the event tonight. Luke, can you hear me, and would you like to make a few closing comments?
Jonathan, I don't think you can hear me. Can you hear me?
No, I can hear you very well.
Very good, very good. Thank you all for a great debate. This is so interesting, Charles, also about the longer term plan, about the carbon sinks, I think is very important for us all. And Elspeth and Barrie, thank you so much for putting the other side of the pro-fishing industry compared to the MPAs, marine protected areas. This is a great debate. Thank you very much indeed. And please follow us in the future at Environmental Frontline. We persuaded the Frontline to do environmental series of debates. Let's keep continuing this, because the Frontline is all of the environment is all of our Frontline. Thank you all.
Many thanks, Luke. And finally, we're going to try and do some technological wizardry and switch over to the video from the Ullapool youngsters. So bear with me while I switch you across. Thanks to all of you, and especially our three panelists, for coming online tonight. It's been really interesting. Fisheries is an immensely complex subject. Every time I talk about it, I learn something new, and I think I've learned something new from all three of you tonight. So bear with me, we're going to go to the Ullapool group, and here we go.
Jonathan, we're not getting the volume.
Oh, really? That's annoying. In that case, do you want to try sharing it yourself, Pranvera, or shall I?
If you just, well, there's very light volume. I unfortunately haven't been able to run it.
I think we might leave it in that case, unless you can share it from your screen.
I have not been able to.
Can you share a link that actually works and we can all watch it in our own
Any
time?
better?
No.
I'm sorry. Can you hear that?
No.
Okay. I think we might just have to leave that one then. But Pranvera, can we ask you to put it onto the Frontline website below on the event listing, so that people can watch it for themselves? I'm sorry that didn't work. It's we've all learned a lot about technology in the last year, and I guess there are some things that technology still needs to learn from us, and sharing those videos is probably one of them. So many thanks to all of you. I'm sorry we've only had an hour and a quarter, but it's been fascinating. And good night to everyone, and especially to our panelists.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks. Good night.